Number 10. What even is a multiverse? I think a good place to start with this list is with something I can actually explain. When the universe first came into being during the Big Bang, it was followed by a massive infinite expansion, which we can prove as we can see it happening. When we look out into the universe, what we see is the past as the light makes its way to us. So, if we look out, say, 5 light years into space, what we see will be 5 years in the past over there. Astronomers with our modern technology are able to see out to a distance of about 42 billion light years into the universe, seeing events in places of space as they happened 42 billion years in the past. But we have no reason to believe the universe doesn't go further and infinitely. As the expansion continues infinitely with no stop, then things are bound to repeat themselves. Events will occur in the exact same form or fashion as they have before, like the formation of the Earth in a galaxy that is basically the same as ours. Life would occur in the same way, and decisions by those living beings would occur in the same way, leading to another you, or another me, or another us. But they would also occur in different ways as well. Every decision you make could be made a different way, and those infinitely repeated versions of you that exist would make those same or different decisions, leading to an infinite number of universes with planets just like this one with infinite different variations of history. This makes a multiverse. Theoretically, if someone is to travel backwards in time, they would now be existing in one of these alternate versions of history, one of these infinite alternate worlds. Number 9. The Mandela Effect. The Mandela Effect, sometimes referred to as the Mandela Phenomenon, is an instance of false collective memory, a situation in which a large mass of people believes that an event occurred when it did not. It was named for a collected belief from a small group of people that Nelson Mandela had passed away in the 1980s in a South African prison when he actually passed away in 2013. Some people even remembered seeing news coverage of his death as well as a speech by his widow. But the thing is, that was nowhere near the only instance of the Mandela Effect. One of the most well-known examples of the Mandela Effect is the collective memory of a movie called Shazam that starred the actor/comedian Sinbad in the 1990s, when actually no movie exists at all. While this could be false memories or your brain filling in gaps, another big theory for why this happens originates from quantum physics and relates to the idea that rather than one timeline of events, alternate realities or universes may be taking place and mixing with our timeline. This theory is suggesting that the groups of people having the same memories is because the timeline has been altered as we shift between these different realities. While we can't prove this theory right, we can't prove it wrong either, and so it has remained a popular answer for an interesting phenomenon. Number 8. Doppelgangers of the mind. Ooh. Autoscopic phenomena. It comes from autoscopy. In Greek, autos means self and scopio means looking at. The simplest form of an autoscopic phenomenon involves feeling the presence of someone next to you without actually seeing a double or anyone there. But the doppelganger effect takes the phenomenon a step further, so that a person may hallucinate that they are actually seeing and interacting with another version of themselves. But probably the most widely experienced and best known form of autoscopic phenomena is the out-of-body experience. Seeing yourself from the outside perspective. They are all technically hallucinations caused by malfunctions in brain mechanisms that root us in the here and now, but just like with the Mandela Effect, some people believe these hallucinations can also be explained with both time travel and or the multiverse. For example, you wake up out of bed but you can still see yourself laying in bed fast asleep. Some believe this is caused by your brain blurring the lines between alternate universes, or that perhaps you traveled forward in time and are now looking back at an alternate timeline of you that is still laying in bed. Now that may sound wacky, but what about when there are actually two people in the world who look basically the same? Number 7. Lookalikes. So, do you remember in my first point how I was explaining that over the course of the limitless expansion of space, things are bound to repeat themselves? Well, we kind of have a pretty good example of that on Earth. Over time and through history, and even sometimes at the same time, there will be people on Earth that look shockingly similar to one another. We have all seen the photos of celebrities being compared to old paintings of people from the past, or two people meeting on an airplane that look practically identical despite not being related at all. The chances of even one of us being created exactly how we are so small that every person alive is pretty much a miracle. that's a positive. So to find someone else who has been created in such a shockingly similar way to you is pretty insane. For some, this just shows that building blocks can repeat themselves within the human species at different points throughout time, and if we expand that out to our universe, it just makes sense that that same kind of thing happens with universes. Doppelganger universes making a multiverse. Number 6. Flying. A lot of parallel universe and time travel stories seem to do with flying, and I've got one such story for you here. And if you stick around for point number 1, there's another interesting event that I think you'd find pretty cool. So, back in 1935, when he was still a wing commander, Air Marshal Sir Victor Goddard was instructed to inspect an inactive airbase located in Drem, near Edinburgh, in Scotland. While flying over it, Sir Goddard found the airbase to be in a poor state, with cattle grazing on the grass that had overgrown. It was in complete rack shambles. Later on, while flying, he got into a bit of harsh weather, and to avoid an accident, Goddard decided to fly back to the airbase till the weather cleared out a bit. Now, as he approached the airbase, the rain oddly and very abruptly gave way to bright sunshine, but the real shock came when he also noticed that the airbase was now in mint condition and in use. He saw mechanics wearing blue overalls working on the yellow planes parked on the runway, and Sir Goddard failed to recognize any one of these planes in the base as any that were in use at this time. Instant renovation of the place couldn't have been possible, and the personnel weren't even wearing the khaki-colored uniforms that were the norm at that time. Also, the Air Force painted all their planes in silver, not yellow. The real kicker came 4 years later though. Europe was war-torn and he happened to visit Drem again, but this time he saw everything he saw 4 years ago in 1935. Same people in the same blue overalls servicing the same yellow planes, and he even found the plane that he couldn't recognize before, a Miles Magister. And you can figure out how that means multiverses or time travel. Number 5. John Teeter, a man from 2036. In November 2000, a man named John Teeter, or Titer, or however you want to pronounce it, started answering questions on the internet about time travel. The man claimed that he is from 2036 and said that their world was torn apart because of the war between the US and Russia. Only a few people survived, and now he had come back into the past to retrieve some items that would help them rebuild society. He specifically asked for a computer, the IBM 5100, which was never released to the public and was only known to exist by only a few people who actually designed it. He was all over the internet for about 4 months, and then he disappeared. The thing that we gotta remember is that this was a man on the internet. I can honestly say that it is very easy to lie about something like this and fabricate any kind of story you want. His reasoning for the collapse of the world is easy to guess at. Russia and the US have been opposing each other for years. The IBM 5100 thing is a little bit weirder, but how do we even know only a few people designed it without someone being told that? You know what I mean? But it starts to make us wonder if John actually is from the year 2036. Problem is, we would have to wait until 2036 to know that. But that's only 13 years from now. And John was a grown man, so his younger self would have to be alive now. But all we have is a first and last name, and if you've ever looked yourself up on the internet, you know there are tons of people who share your same name. So I guess we will just not know until 2036. But then again, if John came back to change things and he was successful, then we won't ever know because we are now existing in an alternate timeline, an alternate reality than the one John came from. Confusing. Number 4, the streets of Liverpool. There are way too many strange stories about the streets of Liverpool that seem almost unexplainable. Like visiting those streets is stepping into an alternate universe or an alternate time. But we're going to talk about one specific example. In 2011, a woman went to a mother care store to buy a gift for her sister. While checking out, her credit card was turned down and she went back home and complained to her mother. Then they both returned to the place where the store was, but there was no store. It was actually a bank. Now, either this woman is full of it and just didn't want to get her sister a gift, so she came up with some crazy story to explain that away, or, stick with me here, or she stepped into a multiversal vortex and traveled to an alternate time or universe where the store did exist, only to leave it back to our universe, which is where she told her mom and returned to the same location in our universe or timeline, but it was a bank. Or she just forgot where the store was, or she's just lying. I'm gonna let you guys decide, you figure it out. Number 3, deja vu. Deja vu is just one of those things that we struggle to describe. Sometimes an explanation of instances of real deja vu comes in the form of short, mental time trips to the future. Now you could just say it is an emotional thing, some feeling of I have already experienced this, a close feeling of familiarity for a scene that's just happening. This could be caused by experiencing a similar event that has already happened in your past. You're immediately and maybe subconsciously entering pieces of knowledge about what will happen in the course of the next few seconds, minutes, or maybe even hours based on those things you experienced before, even if they weren't particularly important or memorable. But what about when those details you fill in are impossible to derive from your present knowledge because you haven't experienced them before? So you just know the layout of a city, although you have never been there in your entire life. You know what the person near you will say or do in the next minutes, verbatim sentences for example, which they have not said before. If you ask a neurologist about this, or any human perceptual, mental, or emotional phenomenon, then they will always have an explanation, and it's almost always to do with biochemistry in the human brain. But that answer is boring, and I'm going to go out on a whim here with the other people on Reddit and say that it's you mentally or subconsciously traveling to the future or to another universe to pick up information and relay it back to your brain. Boom! Number 2. What happens when you die? There are many theories about what happens when you finally bite the bullet, when we hit the hay for good, when we pass away. One theory has to do with the multiverse, and if it deals with the multiverse, then it kind of deals with time. The parallel universe theory claims that when we die, we will be living in the same universe as we were before, just in a different portion of space and time. But if we are now in a different portion of space and time than when we died, we had to have traveled time and space to a point where we didn't make the decisions or didn't experience the exact set of events that led to our demise. Now this is probably the most far-fetched moment from today because it deals with something we 100% cannot prove. But given the idea of so many different religions and beliefs believing in things like a world after our lives, like heaven where everything goes right, or reincarnation after death where we start again without a memory of our previous lives, it feels as though moving to a different portion of space and time, or creating a new personal timeline when ours is destroyed, would somewhat explain those things in some ways. I don't know. The kicker is, we won't ever know for sure, so give me your theories down below. And finally, in at number 1, the plane experiment. Now, we're gonna end today with a real-world experiment of time that could actually prove something here. We are all traveling through time, all of us moving at 1 second per second. Cool. Or are we? According to Einstein's theory of relativity, the faster you travel, the slower you experience time. And this isn't really a theory anymore since some scientists have done some experiments to show that it's actually true. There was an experiment that used 2 clocks set to the exact same time. One clock stayed on Earth while the other flew in an airplane going in the same direction that Earth rotates. After the airplane flew around the world, scientists compared the 2 clocks. The clock on the fast-moving airplane was slightly behind the clock on the ground. So, the clock on the airplane was traveling slightly slower in time than 1 second per second. So, if that's the case, and this is where I go off the rails, if you were on that airplane when you arrived back on Earth, are you now technically in an alternate time, aka a parallel world? Or were you in an alternate timeline while flying in the plane? You were moving at a different speed of time, so you were experiencing a different time, although slightly. Am I completely pulling everything I've said today out of my backside? The answer is, maybe.
Starting off this countdown, we have the photographic evidence. A couple of years ago, a man named Edward came forward claiming that he was a time traveler from the year 5000. He even came with evidence. Now, he used a fake name and had his identity hidden so people weren't gonna come after him. So according to Edward, he claims he was part of a top secret experiment that took place in 2004. During the test, he was successfully transported in time. He was taken to LA 5,000 years in the future. And it's not looking too good. He said, and I quote, "I was standing on a huge wooden platform, and after I realized it was the same city, Los Angeles, but underwater." This man's claims were backed up with evidence. He took a photo of LA underwater. I don't even know what to think. Either he's good at Photoshop or he's actually a time traveler. I just thought that the water would be way more polluted than that. Like, that's far too clear, you know? It's a little sketchy. In our 9th spot, we have Vladimir Putin. Turns out that the president of Russia is a time traveler. Take a look at these photos. First, we got a Russian soldier from 1920, and he looks identical to Putin. Then we have another Russian soldier from 1941, and he also looks like a young Putin, who is pictured on the far right. Too eerie. Either he's immortal, or he's a time traveler. Moving on, at number 8, we have the TikTok time traveler. Now, I talked about this case briefly before, and I'm throwing it on today's list because it's the most recent case of time travel. Basically, a guy named Javier claims that he is a time traveler who is now stuck in the year 2027. The scariest part is that the entire human race is wiped out by then. On his TikTok page, he posts videos of him wandering the streets of Spain alone. He has gone to stadiums, airports, police stations, hospitals, restaurants, and malls. No one is there except himself, which is crazy because normally those places would be packed with people, but they aren't. So here's the thing. Either he's a time traveler and was sent to the future to warn us, or he's somehow faking it. But a number of people have analyzed his videos. Some people believe he edits everyone out of the video. Sure, it's possible to edit objects and people out of videos, but it's harder to do with multiple people in the shot, in which there would be, and it's harder if the people are moving around, which they would be. Another theory is that these videos were pre-filmed, that they were filmed during the pandemic when they were under lockdown and had a curfew. But in order to prove that that's not the case, he gets his followers to tell him where he should go next. He then will go to that specific place and prove no one is there. The freakiest part is he has gone to hospitals. If this was filmed during the pandemic, the hospitals would be filled with people. But when he walks around, no one, and I mean no one, is there. Maybe this is real and we should take him seriously. Who knows, but believe what you want to believe. In our 7th spot, we have the 800-year-old cell phone. In 2016, a group of researchers unearthed an ancient-looking cell phone in Austria. The phone is covered in cuneiform writing, which dates back to thousands of years ago, making this object thousands of years old. But obviously, we didn't have phones back then, when this clearly looks like it was modeled after a Nokia phone. Alien hunters believe that it comes from an advanced civilization that has come to Earth. Others believe that this object is proof of time travel. What's even more weird is that I can't seem to find much about this phone online, so it looks like no one has debunked it yet. Maybe it's real then, who knows? In our 6th spot, we have the man named Noah. Back in 2018, a man came forward claiming that he was a time traveler from the year 2030. He called himself Noah. Obviously, it's not his real name, and he sat down for a television interview to share with the world what life is like in 2030. But of course, his face and voice were distorted to protect his identity. He said that he can't let anyone know who he really is. Basically, he said that he will be killed for speaking the truth about time travel. He goes on to prove that he's a real time traveler by getting an x-ray of his hand. Upon doing so, it's revealed that there's a weird device implemented in his wrist. That's what Noah says is what helps him when he time travels. Not only that, but he underwent a lie detector test and he passed it, showing that his claims were real. Now, what did he say is in store for the future? Well, since this occurred in 2018, he said that in 2019 it will be filled with more UFO sightings, which, yes, that was true. He also claims that in 2028, that's when aliens will come down to Earth, and that's also the year that the government will reveal that time travel is real. That's pretty intense if you ask me. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with the Antikythera mechanism. In 1900s, a team of divers exploring the Greek island of Antikythera made a fascinating discovery. They came across an ancient shipwreck. The ship was filled with statues, jewelry, coins, pottery, you name it. They were all like, booyah, jackpot. As they continued searching the ship though, they came across this weird object. It was a blob of corroded bronze and wood. 2 years later, an archaeologist decided to examine this and discovered it was an astronomical clock. But the items came from ancient Greece and clocks hadn't been invented then. This item was in similar size to a mantle clock, and the bits of wood fragments on it suggest that it was probably in a wooden case. They also believe the case would have had like a circular face or rotating hands. There was also a knob on the side, and the mechanism could rotate forwards and backwards. Needless to say, it was a fairly complex object for that time period, so some believe that it was left by a time traveler. If not, then what could this device be, and how come it was so advanced for its time? In our 4th spot, we have the year 3207.
Quote was time machine. They took me to a room filled by many kinds of displays, gadgets, wires that I had never ever seen. the head of project came to me and told all about that mystical project.
A couple of years ago, an unidentified Greek man came forward saying that he traveled in time to the year 3207. He claims that he was shot forward in time and spent 2 days in the year 3207 as part of a top secret military program. He was paid $100,000 to do so.
That after some minutes they would send me to the year 3207. As I understood, I was kinda laboratory mouse for them, But the money and career that I was suggested were worthy for it.
He claims that in the future the buildings were massive, triple the size that they are today. He also says that there were flying cars and that there was strange colored grass. It wasn't green, but a deep purple. And lastly, he said that aliens, humans, big animals, and robots were all walking together down the street. That's pretty interesting, not gonna lie. Don't know if I believe that guy, but some people do. I mean, he also showed photographic evidence, but claims that the photos got a bit distorted while going through the whole time travel process. To me, they kind of just look like bad Photoshop, but you decide. In our third spot, we have Paul Dinick. Now, if you haven't heard about this case before, then you're in for a shock. In 1921, a man named Paul Dinick, a Swiss-Australian teacher, slipped into a coma for about a year. For that year, he claimed that he went to the year 3096, where he switched consciousness with a man named Andrew Northman. 1 minute he was in a coma, next he's inside Andrew's body speaking a foreign language. For that year, he was living as Andrew. Paul was so scared to tell anyone of this experience, so he just wrote it in his diary and kept it a secret. However, just before he passed away, he gave his diary to one of his students to translate, and that's when it was revealed that he had somehow time traveled to the future. It's pretty insane. Could he be telling the truth, or was it all just a coma dream? In our second spot, we have the time-traveling murderer. Okay, this next story is going to leave you baffled. Back in 2014, a woman was found dead in London. It was clearly a murder. Thankfully, her attacker's DNA was found all over her body. Upon doing a forensics test, they got a match. But here's the thing, the supposed attacker was found dead a full 3 weeks before her victim. So how is it possible for her to kill someone when she had already died? So people think that the killer was a time traveler, and that days before her own death, she went a couple weeks into the future to kill this woman. I don't even know. It's just an insane case, if you ask me. And in our number 1 spot today, we had the London Hammer. Back in 1936 Texas, a man named Max Hahn and his wife were out for a walk when they stumbled upon this odd rock with a tool sticking directly out of it. This is what is now called the London Hammer, or the London Artifact. It was discovered to be part of a hammer that was trapped inside a rock that dates back to being over 400 million years old. Clearly back then they did not have hammers, so how the heck did a modern day human-made tool date back to a time where humans weren't even around? Theory goes that it was dropped by a time traveler, but I want to know who would go that far back in time. Let me know in the comments below, would you rather travel to the past or the future?
Coming in at number 10 now, we have Håkan Nordqvist. In 2006, this Swedish man claimed he had been to the year 2046. How did he get there? Through his kitchen sink. He was trying to fix a problem under his sink, but when he went into the cabinet, he noticed that it just didn't end. It kept on going and going and going. Eventually, he reached the end of the tunnel, and there he was in the year 2042, and he met his older self. This might be easy to dismiss, but for one thing, he brought his phone with him and he filmed it. What you're seeing now is the footage of him meeting his older self in the year 2042. They even show each other their identical tattoos. I don't know about this one, maybe we'll have to wait until 2042 to see if he really was telling the truth. Alright, at number 9 now we have the Chaplin Time Traveler. In 2010, a clip was uploaded to YouTube from the Extras DVD of Charlie Chaplin's film The Circus. It shows people attending the premiere of the movie, and then there is this woman. Now people claim she is talking into a phone. Problem is, this was 1928, about 45 years before the first cell phone was ever even conceived of. Believers say that there would be no reason to hold something to your face in 1928 and talk into it, so what was she doing? Was it a cell phone? Is she a time traveler? Or is there some simple explanation for it? At number 8 now we have the Hamburg bombing. In 1932, two German news reporters visited the Hamburg shipyards to work on a story. J. Bernard Hutton and Joachim Brandt finished their interviews, and as they left, they heard aircraft above them. The sky was filled with warplanes. They heard the city's anti-aircraft guns firing as bombs exploded around them. The shipyard was being bombed. Huge fires started. Warehouses collapsed. The two men ran to see if they could go and help someone, but were told by a security guard to just leave. As they drove away, the sky suddenly started to clear. The streets were busy again with people. The buildings were totally intact. They looked back and everything was fine. They told their editors this, who dismissed it completely, so the men just kind of forgot about it. 11 years later, in 1943, at the height of World War II, the Hamburg shipyards were bombed by Britain. Bernard Hutton saw the newspaper pictures and felt a shiver along his spine. The scenes of devastation were exactly what he had seen in person 11 years before. At number 7 now, we have the time-travelling hipster. This is a picture from 1941 of the reopening of a bridge in British Columbia, Canada. People's eyes were immediately drawn to this man. His clothes don't seem to fit in. He looks more like a modern day hipster than someone from 1941. People said his camera was just too compact for that era. For them, this was a sure sign of a time traveler wearing and using things that just didn't exist back then. The photo has been deemed as authentic. It's not a fake. Critics of this theory though say that the clothes and the camera were available at that time, though not widely common. Alright, at number 6 now we have Andrew Carlson. In 2003, this man was arrested for playing the stock market too well. Over a 2-week period, he went from having $800 to $350 million. He was arrested on the allegation that he had insider information. Under questioning, he confessed he was actually from the year 2256. That's how he knew which stocks were going to perform best. He promised to tell them the whereabouts of Osama bin Laden or the cure to AIDS if they let him go. He supposedly predicted the exact date of the Iraq war starting as proof. The police essentially dismissed him as crazy and found no evidence that he had committed fraud, so they let him go. As the world media swarmed to interview him, he was gone and has never been heard of since. Coming in at number 5 now, we have Sir Victor Goddard. He was a famous British air marshal, most famous for his squad picture that contained the supposed ghost of a former member. He also claimed to have travelled in time. In 1935, he was ordered to fly from Scotland to England when he passed over the abandoned Drem airfield. At that time, it was out of use. Plants had grown everywhere. There were even cows grazing on the runway. Suddenly, he ran into a strange storm. The clouds were yellow and Goddard became disorientated. He was just lost in the clouds and falling. Then the yellow clouds broke and he could see the airfield again. The storm vanished. Everything was clear. The airfield had changed. There were now mechanics there working on brand new planes. 3 of them he recognized, but the 4th was a monoplane that didn't even exist in 1935. The planes were all yellow and the mechanics were wearing blue overalls. He had never seen anything like it. Eventually though, after many years, the planes and the new uniforms did come to pass. Drem Airfield even came back into use, just like Goddard said. Was this all a lucky guess or a genuine time slip? At number 4 now we have John Titor. In 2000, a person calling himself John Titor announced on an online forum that he was an American soldier from the year 2036. Now he said the government sent him back to 1976 to get an IBM computer which they needed to debug computers in the future. He stopped off in 2000 for personal reasons and decided to let people in on the secrets of the future. He got certain things right: North Korea developing missiles, IBM computers having secret functions. He also left detailed schematics and explanations of his actual time machine. But he did get some things wrong. He said there would be another American Civil War in 2008 and World War III would have happened by 2015. But he also said that timelines could be changed. Does that explain it? Either way, the mysterious John Titor disappeared altogether from the internet in 2003. Okay, at number 3 now we have the Mike Tyson fight. In 1995, Mike Tyson boxed Peter McNeely in Nevada. In 2015, 2015, YouTube started buzzing with people saying that in the background of one of the clips of this fight there was a time traveler. They said this woman here was carrying what is clearly a smartphone and taking pictures, years before that was even possible. They said that no phone like that existed in 1995 and that it even flashed red like a smartphone. Other people countered by showing examples of cameras that did exist back then that kind of look similar. What do you guys think though? Is it too close to call, or is it proof of a time traveling boxing fan going back to watch their favorite match? Okay, at number 2 now we have the astronaut. The Catedral Nueva in Spain started being built in 1513. It's a grand old cathedral with a lot of nice stonework you'd expect from the Middle Ages, except for one bit of it. There, along one of the entrances, is a carving of an astronaut. What is an astronaut doing on a 16th century church? Well, this is where the explanations divide. The church itself and many other people there say that the astronaut was added as part of a 1992 restoration project. That makes sense, but others say that doesn't add up. They say that the astronaut was carved a lot earlier than that, and that the restoration work was actually to just repair the damaged astronaut. They say it was proof of a time traveling astronaut who left a little mark on the era he visited. And finally now, at number 1 we have Gertrude Jones. This is her in 1938 leaving the factory where she worked. Some people on YouTube were freaking out saying that she was talking into a phone decades before that was even possible. They said even the way she holds it is reminiscent of someone holding a smartphone with your thumb over the screen. However, in 2013 a woman came forward in the comment section of the video to say that she was the great granddaughter of Gertrude, who was actually part of a science experiment to test an early wireless phone. Some people say that's it, case closed, no more explanation is needed, but others say there are no records of these experiments that happened about 40 years before the first cell phone prototypes were even being made. Was Gertrude a time traveler? Was she also the person who commented on the YouTube video in an attempt to cover her tracks? What do you guys think of this one?
Number 10. John Titor. In November of 2000 there was a huge uptick in activity on the Time Travel Institute forums, which is still a website with some interesting reading material. In between all of the crackpot theories was a group of posts that seemed a bit too detailed to ignore. A man named John Titor was posting, and he claimed to be from the year 2036 and was sent back in time by his government to the year 1975 to retrieve an old IBM computer. They needed it for some debugging back in his home time. But as a little time vacation, he decided to stop off in the year 2000 for some fun. The posts on the forum detailed the technology he used to travel, along with future events like a US Civil War in 2012 and a Third World War in 2015. Obviously none of this happened, but his posts were so convincing and full of things that could have been possible or could have worked in theory that it may have been true, but just by revealing the information he changed the timeline. We can't disprove any of the things he said, and no one has heard from him since. Number 9. Hipster Time Traveler. In 1941, the South Fork Bridge was reopened in Goldbridge, BC, Canada. This photo was snapped to commemorate the event, and everyone out there seems to be dressed in their Sunday best, and no one paid any mind to it at all. But when it was uploaded to be part of the Virtual Museum of Canada, users found something odd, and it spread across the net like wildfire. In the back row of people, there's a man dressed in what one may now call hipster attire. Sunnies and a graphic tee under a textured cardigan, and he even has the I couldn't care less hairstyle to go along with it. Some think he's from the future and inadvertently walked into the frame of this shot, and others think he's just some guy from the 40s who didn't get the dress code memo. Number 8. Future photograph. A man named Edward claimed that in 2004, while living in LA and working in a lab, he was given the opportunity of a lifetime to be sent forward in time 3,000 years and come back with evidence to prove it. A massive achievement for the human species. He claimed in a 2018 interview that when he was sent forward, he was still in Los Angeles, but something was different. He was on a large wooden platform, and everything, all of the buildings and everything around him was made of wood, and water stretched out as far as the eye could see. When he looked down, he saw the remnants of LA under the water. He claimed that climate change had destroyed the planet and water levels had risen to devour the entire city. And he has a photograph to prove it. I'm not sure if I believe that the photograph is real, but I think that the idea of LA being underwater due to climate change is totally plausible and Very frightening. Number 7. Back to the 40s. In 1988, Strange Magazine 2 published the account of a man named LC who claimed that back in the summer of '69, he and his business partner were driving through Louisiana, and out of nowhere the weather changed completely. Then ahead of them appeared an old car, a 40s turtleback, going extremely slow. The car had an orange license plate with 1940 written on it, and what is even stranger is that antique cars like that weren't allowed on the road unless it was for a ceremonial parade. It was moving so slow that they thought something may be wrong, so they pulled up beside it and saw that the driver and her child were wearing clothing from the 40s as well. Once they gestured for her to pull over, the car vanished, right in front of their eyes. Another eyewitness also corroborated the story. Now the question is, who was the time traveler, LC or the woman in the car? Number 6. Marie Antoinette. In 1901, 2 professors from St. Hugh's College in Oxford traveled to the Palace of Versailles, where one of the last French royals, Marie Antoinette, lived until she was executed in 1793. They were walking the grounds when the two of them both reported seeing many people, including Antoinette herself, in 1780s attire walking the grounds. The area they were in was a small retreat built in the garden by Louis XVI for Marie as a gift, so there is a reason to expect seeing her there, though it would be incredibly shocking. Both of them claimed to see the same thing, and all of the apparitions appeared as soon as the tour guide came back to the area. Very strange indeed. Number 5. Air raid warning. J. Bernard Hutton and Joachim Brandt were journalists visiting the Hamburg shipyard in 1932. It was by all accounts an uneventful day of photographs and interviews. Then, suddenly, bombs and gunfire fell from the sky. There were explosions, and the anti-air guns began to fire back with deafening booms. They took photos of the planes in the sky and the guns firing back as they escaped. And when they got back to the city, no one believed their story. They thought the photos would convince everyone, but once they were developed, there was no war zone to be seen. But 11 years later, on the same day they had visited, the British conducted Operation Gomorrah, a raid on the Hamburg airbase, and the photos from that look exactly like what the two men had described. Too bad the other pictures didn't develop so we could compare them. Did they see the war early? I guess we'll never know. Number 4. The Montauk Project. Preston Nichols writes in his book that at Montauk Air Force Base on Long Island, dangerous experiments involving time travel were being conducted, and that he uncovered repressed memories of the experiments in the 80s. His book later became the inspiration to Stranger Things, as he claims that young people with psychic abilities were experimented on and exploited to use their powers to open portals and gateways into different times, one of which being to 1943 on the USS Eldridge, where the Philadelphia experiment allegedly took place. The goal of that was to make their ships invisible, and apparently it worked, but the ship was also sent 10 minutes back in time and the crew went mad. The fact that these two projects linked together seems to show that there was something special about the two experiments. Perhaps time travel attracts more time travel like a magnet. Maybe they'll explain it in season 5 of Stranger Things. Number 3. The Man from Taured. In 1954, in Tokyo, Japan, a man was stopped while going through customs for missing something on his form. When he was being questioned, the immigration officers looked at his passport and everything seemed to be on the up and up, except that the country of origin didn't exist. The man claimed to be from a country called Taured, and he had the passport stamps to prove it too. He said that it was between France and Spain, and he got increasingly more aggressive every time he was told it didn't exist. Why would somebody say that his home country didn't exist? When asked to point on a map to where his home country was, he pointed to what is now known as Andorra, but insisted that it was Taured. They locked him up overnight to continue questioning the next day, but when they went to look for him in the morning, he was nowhere to be found. Perhaps he managed to find a way back to his own timeline. Number 2. Andrew Carlson. In 2003, Andrew Carlson was arrested for insider trading. Over a 2-week period, he had turned $800 into $350 million. It is impossible to make that kind of money without having some sort of inside knowledge. He claimed it was because he was from the year 2256 and came back to make money. He made all sorts of predictions, not just ones for his investments. He also correctly predicted the exact date of the US-Iraq invasion. Soon after he was released on bail, he disappeared, never to be seen again. This one actually seems like something someone with a time machine would do. Squander it on making money. Number 1. Victor Goddard. In 1935, airman Victor Goddard was sent to inspect an abandoned airfield in Edinburgh. As he flew over, he noted its rundown, dilapidated state and that it was deserted. But on his way back, the weather changed drastically. There was heavy cloud cover and rain, but just as quickly as it came, it cleared again. And down on the airfield, he saw people in blue mechanic suits running around, working on yellow planes that he couldn't identify, and as a decorated airman, he knew his planes. It wasn't until 4 years later that he went back to the airfield to see people in blue mechanic suits working on the yellow planes he saw on the runway years before. Miles Magisters, which were not even manufactured until 1938.
In our number 10 spot, we have the Green People. Apparently in the 12th century, a guy and girl were found in Woolpit, England. They were alone and didn't speak English or any recognizable language for that matter. But that wasn't the strange part. Their skin was green, yes. Is this what that 90s song was based off of? I'm blue, if I were green I would die. Because coincidentally one of them did die. Dun dun dun. They were discovered by a villager, and pretty soon after the guy passed away. The girl eventually learned English and was able to speak about where she came from. She said she came from a twilight-covered place called St. Martin's Land, and that one day she and her brother were taking care of their father's sheep when they found a cave. They went into the cave, and after walking for a long time, they suddenly found themselves in Woolpit. That's pretty wild. And you know, I bet you they did slip through time from another dimension or maybe even another world because, well, humans aren't green, so that definitely screams aliens to me. Anyone thinking what I'm thinking? This is how the reptilian race started. Got it, got it. In our number 9 spot, we have Marie Antoinette. I can't say her name without trying to pronounce it the French way. Allegedly, in 1901, 2 professors time traveled. These professors were from St. Hugh's College in Oxford, England, and they were on a trip to visit Versailles. Versailles was once home to the famous ruler Marie Antoinette, who is known for telling all her poor subjects to just eat cake. Let them eat cake, she said. Anyways, the professors Anne Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain were walking around the palace when the most unusual thing happened. They were suddenly inches away from Marie Antoinette. Dumbfounded as Marie was beheaded in the 1700s, it's pretty safe to say they did not expect to see Marie and all the other people who were in 1700s clothing who just appeared out of nowhere. Apparently they all disappeared when a tour guide approached the professors. The 2 women were highly respected and no one believed that they would make up a story like that. So I guess we must conclude that they were telling the truth. Pretty cool. In our number 8 spot, we have the Old Hotel. It was the year 1979, and 4 friends by the names of Jeff, Pauline, Len, and Cynthia were traveling through France when they got tired and decided to stay in a hotel for the night. They found a hotel that was ridiculously cheap in comparison to the rest of the hotels on the street, so it was a no-brainer. The only thing is, the hotel was particularly odd. Not enough for them to go somewhere else, but still it had wooden latches on the doors, no locks, and the windows didn't have glass, they were just thick shutters. What? In the morning when they were eating breakfast, they noticed that there were armed police officers in old-looking uniforms. So old they had capes. Without thinking too much into it, they later left and went on with their day. When they were on their return journey, they wanted to stay at the hotel again, except the hotel wasn't there. After doing some research, they discovered later on that those uniforms that the police officers were wearing were actually from 1905. Whoa. So they definitely time traveled without even realizing it. I want to experience this. If I could have this experience though, I would probably want to be transported to the 70s though, you know, disco, peace, hippies. What more do you need? In our number 7 spot, we have John Titor. Obs, I couldn't make a time traveler list without the famous John Titor. John Titor is probably one of the most talked about time travelers around the world, famously known for popping into our time in November of 2000 and chatting up a time travel forum. He claimed to be from the year 2036, and he said that he was on a mission to retrieve an IBM computer from 1960 1975, but wanted to pop into the year 2000 for, personal reasons. And he said that since he was here, he wanted to warn everyone about the crappy future that was up ahead. How nice of him. A quick World War III in 2015 and a full-blown civil war by 2012 in the US. Well, perhaps he was, 5 years or so off, but some people say that because he revealed info that it actually changed the future and therefore the timeline, would be off. Apparently he was so detailed that it was hard not to believe him, but anyways, super interesting to ponder over. Do you think John Titor was real? Let me know in the comment section below. In our number 6 spot, we have Back to the Past. Apparently in 1969, 2 men were driving on a southwestern Louisiana highway when they saw an old car in the distance. The car began to get closer to them and they saw that it looked like it was slowing down and perhaps the driver needed a boost. The men pulled up beside the car and looked in to see a woman and her child looking at them in 1940s attire and looking quite scared and shocked as they looked back at them. They gestured to her to pull over so they could help her, and so they both did. When they got out of the car though and looked back at the woman, the car had vanished. Okay, did they travel to the past or did the woman travel to the future? I don't know. Is this what Back to the Future was based on? I think yes. In our number 5 spot, we have Montauk time travel. According to author Preston Nichols, there is a secret time travel base in Montauk, New York. Preston wrote the book The Montauk Project in the 90s, and he claimed that in the 1980s he reclaimed some memories of working on the project. He says that they experimented on young humans and one human had psychic abilities. He also said they created a time portal to 1943. A portal that specifically opened on the USS Eldridge, the subject of the Philadelphia experiment. Apparently in World War II, the US performed a series of tests to cloak its workers with essentially an invisibility cloak of some sort. Apparently in October they succeeded, but there was a bit of a side effect. The Eldridge crew members went insane after traveling back in time for 10 minutes. Apparently the workers were brainwashed afterwards and their memories were wiped. Wow, well honestly, I maybe believe it. If the army had cell phones in the 60s, most likely the government created a time traveling device in the 80s to go back to the 40s, right? It's possible. In our number 4 spot, we have Joffer Voren. This story is super interesting and apparently there is no doubt that he was real, just that he might have been a little crazy. But you can decide. Allegedly in 1980, there was a man by the name of Joffer Voren who was found in Germany. He apparently spoke little German, which of course made him difficult to understand. He claimed that he was from a place called Lexaria and spoke the languages Lexarian and Abramian. He said he was looking for his long-lost brother, but had to stop here as he was shipwrecked. He claimed that the world was made up of 5 sections: Sakaria, Aflar, Aslar, Oslar, and Euflar. Honestly, if this guy's story isn't real, I'm sad that he didn't become an author because that's some imagination. In our number 3 spot, we have the missing car. Okay, this one either confirms that this guy time traveled or that maybe we should be careful with who we let be doctors? One or the two. Allegedly in 1935, Dr. E.G. Moon was leaving the home of one of his patients in Kent, England, when he noticed that his car was gone. Also, the driveway was a lot rougher than he remembered. All of a sudden, he saw a man wearing several capes, a top hat, and had a large weapon with him. The man seemed to look like he was perhaps from the 19th century. He turned to go back inside the house when he looked back and he noticed that the pavement was normal again and his car was back in the place he had left it. Coming up at our number 2 spot, we have the bookshop. Apparently in 1996, a police officer and his wife were in Liverpool, England shopping. The police officer's wife went into a bookshop and he decided to go to another store to get a CD. As he began walking to the bookstore, suddenly he noticed that everything became quiet. And then, everything around him looked like it was from the 1950s. He was suddenly standing in the middle of the street and a van honked and swerved around him. He tried to walk back to the bookshop, but it wasn't there. In its place was a woman's store by the name of Cripps. He decided to go inside, but as soon as he did, he was in 1996 again. He later found out that Cripps did exist, but closed in the 50s. Cool! This one has me a believer. What about you? In our number 1 spot, of course, we have the man from Torrid. Yeah, this story is one of my faves, so I had to make it first. This is another story about a man who is from a place that doesn't seem to exist in our dimension. In 1954, there was a man who was stopped at customs in Tokyo, Japan, as he declared that he was from a country that doesn't exist. He showed his passport and stamps to prove that he was indeed from a country called Torrid, and it was located between Spain and France. They asked him if he meant Andorra. He got, angry and said, yes, the location was right, but Torrid had existed for at least 1,000 years. He had never heard of Andorra before. He was then put up in a hotel room for the night while the police investigated further. His room was being heavily guarded, and that is why it was a complete shock to find that by the next morning, he had vanished. Dun dun dun.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have the Moberly-Jourdain incident. This is one of the most famous cases of possible time travel, but it also might just be a ghost story? I don't know. I'm not here to tell you what to think, so I'll just tell you the story and let you decide for yourself. In 1901, 2 professors from St. Hugh's College in Oxford, England, went to take a little visit to the Palace of Versailles, which if you didn't know was the French royal home until the monarchy was abolished in 1792. That means that this was once the home of Marie Antoinette, and she was one of the last royals to live there before she was executed in 1793. So, on this visit in 1901 by these 2 professors, they're just walking around, seeing the sights, enjoying their time. As they're checking out the private retreat built for Marie Antoinette by her husband Louis XVI, boom! Out of nowhere, these 2 just see the Marie Antoinette sitting there, sketching away, dressed in 1780s attire. But not only her, there were a bunch of people also dressed in this same sort of way who seemingly just appeared out of nowhere. Just as quickly as they appeared, however, once the tour guide approached the 2 professors, all of the people vanished. The pair ended up writing a book about their experience, which was quite successful because of how grounded it seemed. Did they travel through time? Did they see ghosts? Or is this all just made up? In our number 9 spot today, we have the bookstore. In 1996, a man and his wife were out in Liverpool doing a bit of shopping. The man's wife went into a bookstore, and instead of accompanying her there, he wandered off down the street in search of a CD store. As he strolled down the street, he began to notice everything getting quiet. After this, he noticed a van that looked like it was from the 1950s that honked and swerved around him. At this moment, he realized that he was somehow standing in the middle of the street and that everyone around him was dressed in 50s styled clothing. Like anyone would be in this situation, he was super confused and he went to head back to the bookstore where he had left his wife, but when he turned around, the bookstore didn't even exist anymore. Where the bookstore was a minute ago was now a women's clothing store, and as soon as he did, it turned back into the bookshop he had initially left his wife in. He was back in 1996 and could not figure out what the heck had just happened to him. After this whole ordeal, he also learned that the clothing store he had seen and gone into hadn't existed since the 1950s either. Whether this is a real time travel story or there's some sort of other explanation behind it, that poor man was probably absolutely terrified. In our number 8 spot today, we have Hutton and Brandt. In 1932, journalist J. Bernard Hutton and photographer Joachim Brandt were sent by the German newspaper to the Hamburg shipyard in order to do a story. Everything was going fine and well and normal and honestly kind of uneventful until things took a large, crazy turn. Both Hutton and Brandt realized that they were caught in an air raid and had bombs raining down around them. Brandt, like the dedicated photographer he was, snapped a few photos, but the pair quickly evacuated the area to get to safety. When they returned to central Hamburg all shaken up, no one believed their story at all. They got the photos developed in order to show their proof, but to their surprise, the photos showed no such thing that would suggest the story they were telling. With no evidence and no one around who would believe them, the pair had no choice but to just go on living their lives. 11 years later, however, Hutton was living in London and he opened up the newspaper one day to see what he never expected. The newspaper that day detailed the story of Operation Gomorrah, which was an air raid on Hamburg, and the photos in the paper looked exactly like what he had experienced 11 years earlier. Did these two somehow end up getting teleported to a time 11 years later while they were out doing that story that day? I truly don't know what other kinds of explanations there could be. In our number 7 spot today we have Live Your Lie. A guy on TikTok who goes by the username Live Your Lie has begun to post videos claiming that he is a time traveler from the year 3036, and he offers his warnings to all of us. He tells his followers that they are as free as they will ever be right now, and that our kids won't even see freedom. He says, so suck it up, because as simple-minded as your time period is, you got it pretty good, you just don't know it. Okay, Mr. Live Your Lie, don't absolutely roast us all. Anyway, when asked about the world population in his year, he says it's just over 2 billion people. He talks about something called the Big Blackout, which he says happens in December of 2052. He says that the Big Blackout is when basically everything goes dark for upwards of 5 years. The internet, the power, it all gets disconnected on account of what's called the terrors, but many speculate otherwise. He says that during these years there's riots, turmoil, and that it's just the worst of times, and that it takes 20 years for things to get fully back online. He also adds that in the year 3036 we still have zoos, but all of the largest animals are gone, so the zoos then actually just consist of animals like dogs and cats. I'm honestly not sure what to make of this one. Like, if he really is a time traveler, I appreciate the heads up on what's to come, but couldn't he have also said like one nice thing about the future? Also, if time travel exists in 3036, why doesn't everyone just head back in time to when things were good? I don't know, maybe there's some sort of reason, or maybe he's lying. I guess one day someone will find out for sure. In our number 6 spot today we have Sir Victor Goddard. In 1935, when Air Marshal Sir Victor Goddard was still a wing commander, he was instructed to head over to an airbase that was located in Drem, Scotland that was inactive at the moment. As he flew over the base, he noticed it was in pretty terrible condition and that cattle had now begun grazing through the grass that found its way through the tarmac. Later on, as he was still flying, he found himself in a bit of a bad spot due to terrible weather conditions. To avoid anything bad happening, he decided to land at this inactive airbase and wait out the bad weather. What's weird, however, is as he got close to the base, the torrential downpour abruptly stopped and the sky very suddenly opened up with bright sun shining down. This was weird but not totally unexplainable, but what was unexplainable is that the inactive airbase could now be seen in full use and full of mechanics in blue overalls working on yellow planes. This was weird for a number of reasons. Firstly, he had just seen the base and it was not even close to looking like this, so how could this all have just come out of nowhere? The mechanics weren't wearing their khaki colored uniforms that were the norm then, and the Air Force didn't use yellow planes, they instead painted all of their planes silver, and there was one plane there that he wasn't able to identify or recognize. Sir Goddard left the situation completely confused and shocked, but that shock only got worse 4 years later when he visited Drem again. After the years that had passed, when he visited again, he saw the exact same scene he had seen 4 years before, like a full deja vu moment. Did he get confused on that day 4 years earlier? Did he fly into the future? Was this some sort of a Flight 828 situation? Unfortunately, there's a good chance we may never know for sure what really happened. In our number 5 spot today we have time travel _0. Okay, so this is one that at the time was both one of the most famous and one of the most believed cases around. In the year 2000, an online thread began about time travel paradoxes on a forum for the Time Travel Institute. On the thread, a user commented on how a time machine could theoretically be made, and this prompted the response of a user whose screen name was time travel _0, and they said, "Wow, Paul is right on the money. I was just about to give up hope on anyone knowing who Tipler or Kerr was on this word line. By the way, number 2 is the correct answer, and the basics for time travel start at CERN in about a year and end in 2034 with the first time machines built by GE. Too bad we can't post pictures, or I'd show it to you. Okay, so this is obviously insinuating that whoever the heck time travel _0 is a time traveler. Throughout the next year, people continued to post questions and messages they had for this guy on that thread, and throughout time travel _0 became known as John Titor, and he told us all his story in great detail. He said that he had been sent back to 1975 in order to bring an IBM 5100 computer to his own time, but he was just stopping into 2000 for a brief rest on his way back home. I guess time travel is exhausting? I personally would not know. He said that the reason for the mission to get the computer was because he needed it to debug various legacy computer programs in 2036 in order to combat a known problem where UNIX was going to have a problem in 2038, similar to what people thought was going to happen in the changeover from 1999 to 2000. There definitely are people out there who still believe that John was a real time traveler, so I guess I'll just leave this one up to you to decide. In our number 4 spot today, we have the time traveling hipster. This photo appeared on the Virtual Museum of Canada website, and it was originally taken in 1941. The photo is said to have been taken at the reopening of the South Fork Bridge in Goldbridge, British Columbia, Canada. At a first glance, this photo is just normal and that story sounds perfectly reasonable, but once we take a closer look, it is clear why this photo went viral. There's that one guy in it who isn't dressed similarly to anyone else in the photo. While someone with their own unique personal style isn't exactly an anomaly, it certainly is very weird and suspicious that he seems like he could be from our current times, which is exactly why he has been dubbed the time-traveling hipster. It appears as though he is wearing a more modern style of sunglasses, some sort of printed t-shirt with a cardigan over top, and it even looks like he is holding some sort of compact camera that wasn't exactly widespread in the 1940s. Maybe the time-traveling hipster really is just that, or maybe he really just was a guy from 1941 who walked off the beaten path so that hipsters today could run. I'm not really sure what to make of this one, to be honest. In our number 3 spot today, we have Andrew Carlson. On January 28, 2003, Andrew Carlson was arrested and held by the police for insider trading at Wall Street. This was because of the fact that in 2 weeks, through the stock market, Andrew was able to go from having $800 to making $350 million. Yep, $350 million in 2 weeks. That is absolutely insane. When the authorities arrested him, they assumed he made his profits through obtaining illegal insider trading information, but when they asked him how he was able to do this, Andrew said that he was actually from the year 2256, and so he knew exactly how all of the stocks were going to perform. Obviously, no one believed this story and just assumed he was telling an extremely far-fetched lie, which in circumstances like this would seem like a pretty safe assumption. But get this, when Andrew was released on bail, he totally disappeared, and despite several attempts to find him, no one has ever been able to locate him. To make matters even a little wilder, it is said that he was also able to accurately predict the exact date of the US invasion of Iraq. Not sure how, but that's what the internet tells me. In our number 2 spot today, we have Edward. Edward is a man who has claimed that he has proof of the apocalypse, and he even brings photos along to prove it. Edward first appeared on Apex TV, which I'll be the first to admit hasn't exactly been a source of credible information, but who knows, maybe this is the time that they got it right. Edward claims that he was part of a top secret program in 2004 and that he was chosen to time travel to the year 5000. This photo I just talked about is a photo that Edward carries that shows Los Angeles completely underwater. In fact, Edward says that in the year 5000 the entire world is underwater, but humans have found a way to live on the water. He claims it happened because of global warming and explained that there was just too much CO2 in the air, which step by step destructed the natural shield zone. I'm not a Photoshop expert, so I wouldn't even know what to look for while looking at these photos he claims to have taken in the year 5000, so you guys let me know, you Photoshop experts watching this. In our number 1 spot today, we have Edgar Allan Poe. Okay, I'm not gonna lie, before I started making this list, I was not convinced that time travel would be a possibility, but after making this list, I think I might be convinced that Edgar Allan Poe is a time traveler. Seriously, just hear me out on this one. There are two main examples why, and I'm gonna do my best to keep them concise. So firstly, Poe's only completed novel was published in 1838, and it tells the tale of mutiny on a whaling ship lost at sea. The men on the ship realize that they need to resort to some extreme measures in order to stay alive, so they begin drawing straws to see who they're going to sacrifice for food. A boy named Richard Parker drew the shortest straw, and therefore he became the next meal. Okay, so let's fast forward 46 years to 1884, and in real life there are now 4 men who have been set adrift after the sinking of a yacht. These men found themselves in a similar predicament to the novels, and I kid you not, they ended up taking the same route and elected to take the life of and then eat a cabin boy. The cabin boy's name? Richard Parker. Not convinced yet? Well, what if I told you that he accurately predicted a scientific advancement before it was even known by, well, scientists? In 1840, Poe penned the gruesome story The Businessman, in which the narrator suffers a traumatic head injury as a child and later lives a violent life. The weird thing about this story is that he was able to grasp frontal lobe injury so well before it was even a thing that was able to be greatly studied, as the first time behavioral changes caused by this kind of injury were able to be studied didn't come until 1848. An actual neurologist, Eric Altschuler, wrote, "There's a dozen symptoms and he knows every single one. There's everything in that story, we've hardly learned anything more. It's so exact that it's just weird. It's like he had a time machine." Maybe I didn't convince you, but I'm not gonna lie, this convinced me.
Number 10. Project Pegasus and the Chrononauts. While that may sound like a sweet alt-rock band, Project Pegasus didn't have anything to do with music, but with moving through time. Seattle attorney Andrew Basiago has been making claims since 2004 that when he was younger, starting at the age of 7, he participated in the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, or DARPA, Project Pegasus, focusing on teleportation and time travel. He and a few others were chosen at a young age because allegedly children could adapt well to the strains of moving between past, present, and future. Along with his fellow Chrononauts, love the name, he adventured throughout time to places like the Gettysburg Address in 1863 and to Ford's Theater to witness the assassination of President Lincoln, quote, 5 or 6 times. I don't know why he was so obsessed with Lincoln. He was allegedly even captured in a photograph. He claims that he witnessed 8 different time travel technologies throughout the course of the project, and that most were based on engineering specs and sketches by Nikola Tesla. And if one person was to come up with teleportation or time travel, I think it would be Tesla himself. Pure genius, that one. Andrew even met himself a few times in the past, and surprisingly didn't cause a paradox. His claims are supported by others who say that the Defense Department has had time travel capabilities for over 40 years, but has kept it secret. Andrew Basiago also ran for president in 2016, but we all know how that turned out. Maybe he should have used time travel to change the outcome. Number 9. Vrillin-Ashtar Radio Incident. On Saturday, November 26, 1977, in the southern United Kingdom, a mysterious voice interrupted a news broadcast and gave strange commands and predictions of the future. Accompanied by unsettling pulsing noises and echoes, the electronic-sounding voice claimed to be Vrillin, a representative of the Ashtar Galactic Command. Aliens or future beings sent to deliver a warning message that humans must denounce and remove all of their weapons of evil in order for an age of peace and prosperity to come to fruition, the age of Aquarius. If humans do not comply and turn from their evil ways, humanity will fall. Here's a little clip.
This is the voice of Allah, representative of the Ashtar Galactic Command, speaking to you.
Though the message is foreboding and super creepy, this messenger from the future actually makes some good points and gives some decent advice, like, have no fear, seek only to know yourselves and live in harmony with the ways of your planet Earth. Seems like they were listening to the hippies at the time, and they had the right idea. After taking control of the station, they bid farewell and said they would leave our plane of existence, leaving us with their final words, "May you be blessed by the supreme love and truth of the cosmos." Aww. Thanks, Vrillin. Number 8. Guardian Angel. In 2019, a video surfaced of a shop owner in Turkey tending to some of his merchandise. Very normal, nothing to see here, until a man calmly walks up behind him and casually taps him on the shoulder as he walks by, causing the shop owner to turn around. But not a moment later, a gate from a large truck driving by swings open, nearly killing him. and if it wasn't for this mystery man's actions, the shop owner would surely be dead. The truck driver returned to apologize for what had happened, but the mysterious stranger was nowhere to be found. Some commenters believe that this man had come back from the future to save lives, perhaps not just the shopkeep's. That's the only one that we caught on camera. Others have noticed that the two men look similar, even their outfits aren't far off, implying that maybe it's the same man or their son somehow come back from the future. Though it looks like it was filmed on a potato, so who can be sure. Number 7. Rudolph Fentz. The story of Rudolph Fentz is one that has been hotly debated amongst the time travel investigation community. In 1951, people in Times Square in New York City noticed a man suddenly appear wearing 19th century clothing. He appeared to be disoriented and confused, and after running into an intersection in a daze, he was hit by a car and fatally injured. When his body was inspected, they found strange items in his possession that appeared to have come from another time. A copper token for a beer worth 5 cents bearing the name of a saloon which was unknown even to older residents of the area, a bill for the care of a horse and the washing of a carriage made by a stable that was not listed in any address book, old banknotes, business cards with his name and address, as well as a letter sent to him postmarked in 1876. These items in his attire have led people to believe that Rudolph was a man from the past, probably from 1876, who unfortunately slipped through time to a place that he didn't or couldn't comprehend, and his confusion ultimately killed him. Tragic story, really. Number 6. Bob White. In 2003, Dave Hill, along with countless others, received an email from Bob White. Normally, a spam email would just get ignored by Dave, but this one was too strange to pass up. The email explained that he needed help from a time traveler, or any alien disguised as human, because his life had been severely tampered with, and he needed, quote, temporal reversion to correct it. He resorted to the internet to find help.
You ever come across anything like time travel?
He asked the people receiving the message for strange mechanical parts that didn't exist, like an AMD dimensional warp generator module containing the GRC79 induction motor, or an Acme 5X24 series time transducing capacitor with built-in temporal displacement. I don't even think a Time Lord could help him find these ridiculous sounding parts. But Dave Hill decided to have some fun and responded to his message saying that he could get what he needed. And he even sent an old hard drive motor to Bob, claiming that it was a warp generator, which Bob gratefully accepted, believing it was the part he needed.
It's a time machine, Napoleon. You bought it online.
You're right.
It works, Napoleon. You don't even know.
It was later revealed that Bob White was a man named Robbie Tadino, a 22-year-old from Massachusetts who admitted to sending over 100 million messages for help out into cyberspace, and truly believed, and still does believe, that he was affected by time travel and needs to make a machine to fix it. The story he describes and the machine he seems intent on building is so specific that many people are convinced he has met time travelers or aliens and is really trying to recreate their technology with human things that just don't exist yet. Let's just hope he gets it all sorted out. Number 5. The Philadelphia Experiment and Montauk Project. I've talked about these before in a previous video, but they require another mention here as there are so many accounts of what happened that it's overwhelming. Allegedly, there was a secret military operation being performed in 1943 at the shipyard aboard the USS Eldridge. The experiment involved cloaking, not time travel, strangely enough, but when they attempted to conceal the ship with the technology they developed, the ship did indeed disappear, but that was because it was moved 10 minutes into the past, which reportedly caused some of the crew to go mad. And later, another secret military operation called the Montauk Project was tasked with creating gates for time travel, using psychic links from children who are much more attuned to these kinds of things apparently, and can open their minds more, so the witnesses claim. One of these many gates that were opened apparently led back to the USS Eldridge during the 10 minutes of time dilation, but these two experiments are linked by one person who has since shared their experience. Number 4. Al Bielek. Al Bielek was a Navy officer aboard the USS Eldridge during the Philadelphia experiment, also known as Project Rainbow. And when the time jump occurred, he wasn't sent 10 minutes into the past. He claims that he was sent forward to the year 2137. When he was rescued from the water, he was taken to a futuristic hospital where he was treated for radiation sickness they say he developed from the time jump. He described major differences in the world, the coastlines being swallowed by the oceans, worldwide government collapse followed by the rise of a system that allowed everyone to get what they need when they needed it, for free, by abolishing the concept of money. He was eventually sent back and continued to live his life, burdened by what he had learned, with few believing him, until he was later recruited by the Montauk Project as their program director for the psychics involved with creating the time tunnels, which he used to investigate as far back as 100,000 BC and as far forward as the year 6037. Of course, he maintains that the government has done everything in their power to stop him from revealing all of this, disavowing him once he went public with his stories. Do you believe his story? Let me know in the comments. Number 3, time-traveling Trump. Now, I don't like talking about this former first family very much unless it has to do with all the current investigations, but some of these coincidences are just a little too eerie, though I do believe that they are just that. This conspiracy theory came from a discovery on the Library of Congress website, where readers found books from the 1890s, one called Baron Trump's Marvelous Underground Journey, and another called 1900, or The Last President. The first is about a young man named Baron Trump, who discovers portals for time travel, and at one point in the book he was actually guided by a man named Dawn. In the second book, an odd choice for president wins the election, and has someone with the last name Pence in their cabinet. Even the address where New York's Trump Tower now stands was mentioned. Personally, I believe that the former president's son Barron was named after the character in the book, not the other way around, but the connections found are certainly interesting. Number 2. Mike Markham. In early 1995, 21-year-old Mike Madman Markham attempted to build a time machine on his front porch. Of course, it didn't work, but that didn't deter him, and he kept working towards his goal. He later stole the expensive parts that he needed and caused a bit of trouble doing so. Then, after he got out of jail, he went on a radio program called Coast to Coast AM to talk about the machine he was building, saying that he was nearly finished and would be testing it soon, even giving out his phone number so that anyone with knowledge on the subject could help him out. Then he disappeared off the face of the earth. No one could find him for months, after which he said he was going to travel back in time only with his cell phone, and later that same week an old story was dug up from the 1930s of a man who was found dead on a beach in California, encapsulated in some sort of metal tube with a strange device, the description of which matches that of a cell phone from the 1990s. Could that be the eventual fate of Mike? And finally, our number 1, under the sink. In 2006, a Swedish man by the name of Håkan Nordqvist was fixing a leak from a cracked pipe under his sink when he noticed something strange, a bright light that seemed to beckon him in a way. He crawled in and suddenly appeared somewhere completely different, but he wasn't alone. He claims that he met someone there, or rather, he met himself. He claimed that he ran into himself, but a future version, perhaps around 70 years old. And since he knew no one would believe him, he pulled out his cell phone and filmed the meeting. The two men do look remarkably similar, but the clincher for this whole story is when they rolled up their sleeves and revealed that they both have the exact same tattoo, in the exact same place. We all know that one of the main rules of time travel is to never interact with yourself, so we're lucky he didn't cause a paradox and rip a hole in time and space.